We talk a lot on this show about a tension between what we often call an economic left and an identitarian left. And very often we've been skeptical of identity, what we call identity politics, because of the way very often it's used to manipulate the working class to create divisions. So that's a question I would love to ask you. Do you see a tension between those things? And particularly, is there a generational divide in regards to this?
There's always a tension between, older guys, younger guys, whatever. But the American worker is class unconscious. Mm-hmm. They have no idea. You start telling them about Lenin, they've been taught from childhood, shut your brain down. You do not want to hear anything. And I give you some personal experience. I was a steward at the time, and I'm on a bus before I took over the local, and before we took over the local, excuse me. And we're talking about, man, we should have sick days. We should have this. We should have that. And a guy named Jack Daniels, dear friend, Jack Daniels says, I can't call him that anymore because he went to rehab. But I don't remember his name. And Jack Daniels says, hey, Chris, that's a good idea, man. But that's communism. There was a chill in the bus. The conversation died right there. So I talk to people about outcomes because we can agree to outcomes if we don't put labels on them. So if you go to people and say, should everybody have free medical care in the country? They'll say yes. Right. If you tell them it's socialized medicine, they'll say no, right? They don't have a concept that Social Security is a socialistic thing, that Medicare is a socialistic thing. So why use those buzzwords, right, to kill the movement when you could just simply talk about the outcomes that we're looking to achieve? So you have these people who are steeped in Marx and steeped in Lenin and steeped in Trotsky and Mao and whatnot, but they have never spoken to someone that have never read one of those books. And if you ain't never read one of them books, they ain't even talking to you either, right?
Right. Yep.
So I talk to, I bet half of my members on Metro North are Trumpsters. But I can talk to them about issues that affect them without putting a label on it. Then I go to them. I mean, right here in Brewster, there's not even one black guy in that shop. And I can talk to them and I'll do, say, hey, Sleepy Joe. And by just calling him Sleepy Joe, I can continue a conversation that they would have shut down if I said President Biden. You understand the point I'm saying? Right. They know
that's why I love Let's Go Brandon. I love Let's Go Brandon. I say it a lot.
I make jokes with them about it.
I'm all for
it. Because you have to get them to understand this is the outcome we're looking for.
I think the way that workers will be won over and will, I worked in industry, in the railroad industry, in freight and in passenger. I was also a track person in the Washington Metro system. So I did all the things that Chris was talking about before, sweeping out the switches and all that. And, in my 30 years of, observing and participating and having discussions all over the place, because in the cab of a locomotive, sometimes, you're getting into some pretty deep discussions with your coworkers. Mm-hmm. I would say that consciousness is very uneven and very contradictory and always subject to all the pressures of capitalist society on them to atomize them and for politics to be shunted into that two-party shell game. But at the same time, I'm totally convinced that the way that workers will overcome these divisions that the employers and the bosses try to impose on us based on race, job status, immigration status, sex, gender, all the things that in the absence of a fighting labor movement that could unite the working class, liberal and conservative and reactionary politicians use these wedge issues and these identity issues. These really originate more with the right and the liberals, and all this virtue signaling and stuff like that. So the way that those things will be overcome is not, I don't think, I wouldn't counterpose. I'm not an identity person, but everybody has their identity and everybody has their history and everybody has their experiences. And when they're in struggle, that is how they will overcome that. You know, I worked in an industry and I wrote a long essay on this about racism in the rail industry, a review of the book, Brotherhoods of Color, that people can look up in Dissident Voice. And, you know, the use of racism to divide the Railway Labor Act created these white job trusts. How was that overcome? I worked with the first engineers, black engineers, that were not hired until 1969. You know, because of the civil rights movement. And those guys put up with a lot of, I can't say the S word, I guess, you know, in their days. But eventually, and through struggle, that when people were working together, I saw the same thing when I worked in a United Auto Workers plant. I was part of helping to organize shipyard workers in Newport News, Virginia. I remember one white worker that had a Confederate flag tattooed on his arm, and he was pro-union. And then the next I heard about him, he had spent a lot of money and was in a lot of pain getting that damn thing scrubbed off because he was pro-union and he worked with his black co-workers were pro-union. So these things are overcome in struggle and common experience.
Right.
Not abstract, academic, ideological.
Exactly. That's right.
I don't know how steeped I am, but I've read a lot of Marx too, and I consider myself a socialist. I don't think it hurts the argument. You know, you should avoid jargon and you should avoid superficial arguments, but you know, you should also tell the truth about the class relations in society and who benefits and all of those questions. And I think one thing about the young generation today, they're grasping towards getting a class politics with this identity stuff. But if they can see the limits of that and they can have people that can explain how to win those things and like the whole working class, I think they'll increase their consciousness, so to speak, as we used to say in the 60s, instead of woke.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, right.
Please clap.